Formula One is seeing one of the most dominant seasons ever. Max Verstappen has scored enough points to be leading the Constructors Championship on his own and can cruise to the 2023 F1 title from here. So what if Verstappen wasn't in the championship in 2023? How close would it be? And how many teams could be in contention for this Constructors title? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. For the purposes of this video, I've assumed that Verstappen has failed to finish each race. This means that Perez will be the only driver scoring points for Red Bull. It also means that fastest lap points have gone to the other drivers whenever Max Verstappen took that accolade. In addition, sprint race and Grand Prix points have been adjusted as well. It's to be expected that the order of the championship will remain the same or very similar, but the gaps between the drivers and the story of the season could be so different given the development of different teams and how the rest of the drivers and teams seem to be fighting for second best at each race weekend. I'm going to take a look at the Drivers' Championship and who will be leading that, as well as the Constructors' battle in this hypothetical scenario, and then I'll take a look at some of the other key moments that could have happened in this very different 2023 season. The closest championship battle since 2012. The Drivers' Championship is the obvious place to start when looking into this data. Given there's a 7-point gap between first and second position, the drivers gain more from finishing second to Verstappen in reality. So far, we know Verstappen has won 10 of the 12 races this year, and by taking him out of the running, 5 different drivers from 5 different teams would have taken a race win in 2023. Perez has taken 2 wins this year already, but without Verstappen that total would be 5, and he would be in the lead in terms of race wins. Alonso, Hamilton and Norris would then follow on 2 wins each, with Leclerc taking a single race win in Austria. This is an interesting insight. You can see how McLaren's recent uptick in form would have given Norris his first 2 race wins back-to-back between Silverstone and Hungary, and this has seen his points haul improve significantly in the recent rounds, but we'll get to that data shortly. The last time Formula One had 5 different winners in the opening 12 rounds was in 2012, when there were 7 different winners in the first 7 races, and 5 different teams had taken the checkered flag. This 2012 season was an outlier, and it was incredibly competitive in the early stages. But it must be said that in this hypothetical alternative 2023 season, there will be some thrilling outcomes, and the story of both Aston Martin and McLaren's progress would have been even more impressive. Looking at the points scored through the season, I've taken the top driver from each of the top 5 teams to show the story of the season. You can see how Perez would have taken 4 of his 5 wins in the first 5 rounds, and this gives him a significant lead in the Drivers' Championship over Fernando Alonso, who makes consistent progress during this time, finishing second in 4 of those races and third in the other. This opening to the year would have looked similar to the dominance we are seeing from Verstappen in the real 2023 season, given he seems to be winning every race he enters at the moment. In the alternate scenario, Perez would have built a lead of 32 points from those first 5 rounds, which is a significant lead from not too many races. Following these first 5, both Alonso and Perez have periods where they seem to struggle, and at one point, after Canada, you can see that Alonso actually overtakes the Red Bull driver as he would have been on 155 points to Perez's 151. This would have been a pivotal moment, and as we've seen in reality, the pressure on Perez's shoulders to score more points would have been evident after his disappointing results over the next 3 races between Monaco and Canada. Out of those 3 races, Alonso would have taken his 2 wins from the year before the upgrades Aston Martin have brought more recently would cause the team to drop back relative to some others. So far, the championship fight would have been fascinating to watch, with Perez going after his first championship win and a 41-year-old Alonso chasing his elusive third. Since Canada, Perez's recovery becomes clear as the gap is widening again, and following the Belgian Grand Prix, the Mexican Drivers' Championship lead would be at its largest at 42 points. But with 10 more races to go this season, it could still be anyone's championship, which is clear when you look at how quickly Alonso closed a 32-point gap earlier in the season. By comparison to reality, Verstappen currently holds a championship lead of 125 points or 5 race wins, which shows just how good Verstappen has been to this point. Hot on both of the alternative championship protagonists' heels though is another consistent performer. Whereas both Alonso and Perez have had consecutive races where they haven't scored so many points, Lewis Hamilton has not. Outside of Austria, where the British driver would have finished 7th, Hamilton would have come home in the top 5 at every Grand Prix so far this year. Mercedes have had a lot to complain about so far this season with their car, but the truth is that they've been one of the most consistent performers each weekend, particularly with Hamilton's car. Hamilton's 2 wins would have come in Australia and Spain, and he would have taken a total of 7 podiums this year. To this point in the season, Hamilton would have not quite overtaken Alonso for second position in the championship, but despite being 1 point behind in reality in the fight for third, he would be 2 points behind Alonso in the championship, and very much in the championship fight. Charles Leclerc's poor start to the season is evident in this graph as well, as is Lando Norris's given he was struggling with the disappointing McLaren. But these 2 drivers would have taken their combined 3 race wins within the last 4 races before the summer break. From their lines, it's clear that the Ferrari driver has had some excellent races and some disappointing ones as well, as the car has been better suited to some tracks and strategy calls continue to be a challenge for the Italian team. By comparison, Lando Norris is making a huge comeback from his early season challenges. His 2 wins back-to-back between Britain and Hungary are evidence of this. His trajectory is clearly very promising as he's closing the gap to the other drivers. In fact, over the last 4 rounds since the Austria upgrade, Norris would have outscored all the other drivers aside from Sergio Perez, with the British driver scoring 80 of his hypothetical 98 points. This comeback trajectory would make it very difficult to come back to win the championship with just 10 rounds to go, but as with the Drivers' Championship generally, there would be more pressure on Perez's shoulders with so many other drivers in the running. On the whole, the Drivers' Championship would be poised to be incredibly competitive going into the second half of the year. If you add Carlos Sainz and George Russell into the mix, the top 7 drivers would be very close, and any one of them could, in theory, fight for the title. It would be fascinating to see 5 teams with cars capable of winning races, and all of these drivers would be fighting for the top positions each race weekend. But it wouldn't just be the Drivers' Championship they'd be fighting for. But before we look at the Constructors' Championship insights, as well as the other interesting points to note from the data, I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. Right now, 74% of you watching haven't yet hit the subscribe button, so if you're enjoying the content and want to see more, you should subscribe to Behind the Drive today. Alternatively, you could keep watching without subscribing. A 5-way fight for the Constructors' title. The alternate Constructors' Championship fight would have been very fascinating as well. Now of course this championship is far less realistic than the Drivers' Championship, as even if Red Bull just had 2 drivers that are comparable to Sergio Perez, they would still be leading this championship with ease. In reality, Red Bull are of course dominating this championship and look likely to be able to seal the win in the next few races. It's a common joke at the moment to show that Verstappen would be leading the Constructors' Championship on his own, but if Perez was on his own and results adjusted accordingly, he would actually occupy 4th position in the Constructors behind Mercedes, Aston Martin and Ferrari. The Constructors' Championship would have been incredibly close after Miami, with just 4 points separating the top 3 constructors. Aston Martin would be leading on 127, Red Bull would be behind on 124, and Mercedes would be on 123. While the Constructors' title is rarely something that people are too interested in the F1 world, this would have been one of the most exciting competitions ever. There would have been a significant amount of pressure on the Strolls, as Alonso would have scored 92 points to Lance Stroll's 35 at this point in the year. Obviously, this is 2 Aston Martin drivers against a single Red Bull one, but the gap between the team leader Aston Martin and the driver learning from him would have been exacerbated in this scenario. And it would have been interesting to see whether Alonso would have expected more from his teammate in this scenario. Following Miami, the downturn in form of Perez would see both Mercedes and Aston Martin pull away, and the subsequent challenges for Alonso and Stroll would see Mercedes take a significant lead in this championship. To this point in the year, they would lead by 58 points, and the top 4 teams would all be well within contention. But it's the 5th place team that would be the big talking point going into the summer break. Already, McLaren are a team that has a lot of attention following their recent developments. They would have scored the most points of any teams following the last 4 rounds, with the team taking 117, while Mercedes would have taken 102. This would put them in a great position to catch up to these top teams through the second half of the year. Realistically, their chances of catching up to Mercedes would be slim, but the other 3 teams in contention could be well within their reach in this scenario. This is the case because both McLaren drivers are delivering from their new car, with both Norris and Piastri showing what they're capable of. Both drivers would have taken podium finishes, which is something that we'll take a look at shortly. Some other interesting insights. Not only is Max Verstappen dominant in the 2023 F1 races, but he's also dominant in the sprint events as well. This year, he's taken 2 wins and a third place finish in these events. Without Verstappen, Perez would have taken 2 wins from the 3 races, which is 1 additional victory in addition to the one he already took in Azerbaijan. But it would be Carlos Sainz who would just be 1 point behind Perez based on the total points scored from the sprints this year. The Ferrari driver would have taken 4th, 2nd and 3rd in the 3 events, and this consistency would have been key to him scoring 19 points to Perez's 20. Piastri would have of course taken his first great sprint race win in Belgium, with the Australian driver delivering in a tricky race with the upgraded car. Logan Sargent would have taken his first ever Formula 1 World Championship point at the British Grand Prix if Verstappen wasn't in this World Championship. The American driver has improved through his rookie year, but he's not knocking on the door of points too often so far. Comparing this to his teammate, Alex Albon would be leading the way for Williams on 19 points. He'd have scored in 5 Grand Prix and even taken a point in the sprint race in Azerbaijan. The way he scored these points is also very interesting. Albon had a 6-race run without points between Saudi Arabia and Spain before a 4-race point scoring streak between Canada and Hungary. This shows the development of the Williams car through the year, and the team's 20 points would represent their best start to a season since 2017. In this hypothetical scenario, 3 drivers who haven't yet scored podium finishes in 2023 would have taken a step into the cooldown room. Sainz would have been on the podium at the first round in Bahrain, but wouldn't have taken any others so far. Stroll's 3rd place in Australia would have potentially held off his critics, but as I mentioned earlier, he would still be significantly behind Alonso. And Piastri's first and only podium so far would have come at the British Grand Prix, though I hope his first podium in reality will come soon after the summer break. In terms of teammate battles, the key one to note would be in the competition at AlphaTauri. The team are only on 3 points in reality, and would be on 9 in this alternative scenario. Tsunoda would have still been the only driver to score points though to this point in the year. It'll be interesting to see if I revisit this at the end of the season, whether Ricciardo bridges that gap in his seat. The alternative 2023 championship would be a fascinating season. Many teams and drivers would be in the fight, and there would be great racing for the win each weekend. However, in reality, what this really shows is just how well Verstappen is performing. To win 10 races from 12 is just incredible, and 8 of those have been achieved in a row, which is a feat that not many people expected to see again since Vettel's run in 2013. All the other teams are playing catch-up, and while they compete with each other, Verstappen will only continue to run away with the real World Championship.